Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network. This is our special Friday edition called Flashback Friday, where we recap the lessons learned from the interviews from the current week. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net for links to each of the episodes that we covered today. Also, sign up for our free weekly entrepreneur email. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Want daily interviews with real estate investors and none of the fluff? Go to bestevershow.com, where Joe Fairless interviews real estate investors and entrepreneurs daily about their best advice ever. Go to bestevershow.com.
Thank you for joining me today for our Flashback Friday episode. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about the entrepreneurs and investors that we were able to interview this week. If you haven't already listened to them, I would challenge you to go back and listen to each one of these episodes because all of them were very beneficial and had a lot to offer. And all I'm going to be able to do here is just go through the highlights of each of those interviews. And I want to give you some of the major points, but really it would be very beneficial for you to go back and listen to those. We interviewed 4 different entrepreneurs this week. On Monday, episode 74, we interviewed Dossey. On Tuesday, we interviewed Tamara Ghandour. That was episode 75. Episode 76 aired on Wednesday, and that was David Inzlicht. And then episode 77 on Thursday was Knudsen. On Monday, episode 74, we talked to Dossey. And Les is a professional coach or business coach, if you will. He started his company after what he called the crucible in his own personal life. And I think one of the main things that we learned from talking to Les is just about the value of experiencing and working through difficult things. A lot of times we tend to shy away from difficulty and struggles because, let's be honest, no one likes to struggle. No one enjoys the struggle, but a lot of times there's things that can only be accomplished in our lives and be added to our lives through a struggle. And so he talked in great detail about a very difficult period of time in his life, even going so far that at one point he asked God to take his life because he didn't want to live anymore. But he also, on the other side of that struggle, talked about how it really created in him the ability to relate and sympathize with other people. And of course, that's a very, very important trait to have if you're going to be a coach. And that is what he does now. So really an invaluable experience for him. And I know he would say that he learned to reflect and look at that time of his life in a different way. And instead of resenting the struggle, but really be able to appreciate what he is now as a result of that. I also thought it was really interesting, one of the models that he uses for thinking and planning and what he calls the winning focus. And he uses the acronym GOALS, GOALS. And really, it's almost a way of journaling or thinking about the things that you have to do and the things that you want to do. So the G stands for gratitude. The O stands for opportunity. A stands for actions. L stands for lessons. And S for successes. And so this is something that he uses to think through new opportunities, to think through decisions that he needs to make, is with that acronym. That was Dossey on Monday, episode 74. On Tuesday, we interviewed Tamara Ghandour. That was episode 75. And what she talked about, several things. Number one, she talked about the struggle that she had to be employed by other people. And I think she said her typical job cycle was around 18 months, meaning that, she would go and she'd work for a company and she'd have a job for 12 to 18 months and then she couldn't work for them any longer. She'd have to move on and do something else. And she said eventually she got to the point where she just had to own the entrepreneur label, that this is who she was and that her personality was just that of wanting to create and expand and do something on her own. So I really appreciated her honesty about that. I also appreciated the honesty with which she talked about the decision that she had to go through to invest in her business and how, for her at least, it was a bit of a struggle to take that leap and put a lot of money into an improvement and investment in the business, and how, she is actually still at the point where she's waiting to see the return on that. And she's still having to put more money into the business because she's waiting for what she knows is coming. She also talked about the J curve, which is something that we hear entrepreneurs refer to sometimes, but she says, I'm kind of at the bottom of that J curve. And so it can be a little bit of a frustrating, discouraging time because, we all know that in order to make money, you have to spend money and you have to invest money. And sometimes that can feel like a never ending prospect that the business always needs money. But that J curve, it's there. And right now, she is at the bottom of that J curve where she's just having to put money into her business. But she talked about, knowing that upward slope is coming. And when it does, and for her particular business, she expects it to be significant. And so she's holding out, she's continuing, she's persevering and doing what she knows she needs to do, invest in her business. On Wednesday, episode 76, we interviewed David Inzlicht, and David is a recruiter. He owns a company called ProForce Personnel, and David shared a little bit different perspective than some of the other entrepreneurs that we've talked to because he, as an entrepreneur, runs a company that recruits other employees for other companies. And so he's had some different struggles than maybe some of the other people that we talked to. We had a very interesting discussion with David on the topic of ghosting and some of the things that you can do to limit the ghosting. Just in case you don't know, ghosting is when a candidate who has responded to a lead of some sort that you put out there then does not show up for the interviews or replies to follow-ups. And that can be very frustrating. If you're trying to generate leads and you're trying to fill a position and you spend time reviewing a resume or maybe even having an initial conversation with someone and then they just don't show up for an interview or follow-up, that can be really frustrating. And so he and Dan in particular had a very interesting discussion on ghosting and what some of the things you can do to limit that are. David also talked about how it was really important for him to have some peers that he could bounce ideas off of and how that in one point saved him from really closing down his business. He was debating whether to continue the company or not, but he had some peers that really provided some good insight. One thing that he did mention, though, is that even when you have those peers to bounce those ideas off of, we always have to be the person to make the decision, and we have to be the one to take responsibility for that decision. We can't let anyone else take the decision out of our hands, so to speak, because we're the ones that have to live with the consequences. Lastly, on Thursday, we interviewed Knudsen, and I really enjoyed talking with Christian. He had a 20-year career in sales. And so he provided a perspective on sales that, only comes with working in those sales for a very, very long time. Most recently, he's combined his career in sales with some technology background, and he's created a CRM and management tools. And so he's been able to use that and go out on his own now during the last 4 to 5 years. The thing that I found the most interesting about Christian's interview was his support of micromanaging your entire life. And that may sound tedious, it may sound even, unnecessary, but he talks about how, once he became an entrepreneur and had so many things pulling at him, he got to the point where he was not managing, he wasn't able to manage all of his schedule and the things pulling at him with the demands of his family. And he talks about, how his family suffered for a little bit and it put a big strain on them. And his solution was micromanaging every aspect of his life. And he talked about how he uses his planner. He schedules everything out in his day at 15-minute increments, everything in 15-minute increments, so that he can schedule and set aside time for the things that are most important to him and still schedule the other things that need to be done as well. He also shared about how now, as a successful entrepreneur, he's looking for ways to make connections with people and give when people haven't even asked for it, give in ways that they don't even know that they need. He used the example of having a conversation with a woman who owned an IT company, and he was able to just sit down and talk with her and provide some perspective and advice. And it wasn't something that was planned, but it was something that he saw as being an opportunity for him to give. And so I thought that was an interesting perspective from him on that as well. So those were the 4 that we interviewed this week: Les Dossey, Tamara Ghandour, David Inzlicht, and Knudsen. We'd love it if you would go and download those episodes, listen to them, and benefit from the perspective of all of these entrepreneurs that we've interviewed this week.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.